Henry stared at Bumi the same way he had seen men look at women lustfully on TV. "Bumi, please," he said softly, "let's do that thing again. That same thing the man and woman did in the video. I like it and it's so sweet." Tears rolled down from Bumi's eyes as she shook her head. "No, brother. Henry the First won't do that again. It hurts so much. I never want to do it in my life again. Are you wondering how these children reached this extent? Why is Henry asking Bumi to do something so unspeakable and scary? How did it get to this extent? And where are their parents in all of this? Stay with me as we uncover the heartbreaking story of Bumi and Henry. 9-year-old Henry and his 7-year-old sister Bumi were often left alone at home by their parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ezekiel. Their parents are hard-working professionals in teaching respectively. Henry and Bumi had grown up gotten used to being alone all by themselves in the house all through the day. It was far from something. They enjoyed their staying alone in the house as they were not allowed to cross the gate and go outside. They tried as much as possible to entertain themselves with different kinds of games or drawing, but the TV always seemed to lure them. Most of the times, they leave playing and focus on watching TV, and day by day, they got used to watching TV always. In one particular evening, Henry was watching a late-night show featuring smoking, loud music, and adults laughing and talking in a way that seemed different and odd to him. The scenes moved quickly, filled intense and adult content. Henry got so interested in the movie as it's making him to feel a different kind of way. With excitement and curiosity, he called out to Bumi, who was in the other room. "Bumi, come here. Look at this," Henry's voice echoed down the hallway. Bumi, who was busy reading a novel, quickly dropped it and rushed into the living room to see what was happening. She sat beside her brother. The two stared at the TV with their eyes wide at the screen, mesmerized by the flashing colors and fast-paced music in the movie. They didn't understand much of what was being said, but it seemed fun. They liked what they are watching, so they kept watching. "Why are they doing that?" Bumi asked innocently. Her forehead increased in confusion. She didn't understand the content, but felt it was different from the other movies they used to watch. This is actually the first time they are watching this kind of movie. "Well, I don't know," Henry replied, still watching the movie with interest as if he understands what is going on. "Maybe it's something fun that big people like Daddy and Mummy do." The scenes continued, leaving their young minds confused yet curious. They didn't know what is going on yet, but the truth is that the movies they were watching weren't meant for their eyes. They were unknowingly stepping into a world far more complex than their understanding. Days passed after Henry and Bumi had watched that strange movie. But the scenes in the movie remained fresh in their minds. The curiosity planted within them grew soon, becoming something they couldn't ignore. One afternoon while their parents were at work, Henry looked at his sister Bumi, his face lit up with excitement. "Bumi, do you remember that thing we saw on TV?" he asked quietly with a mischievous smile. "That thing that big people used to do?" Bumi asked while still playing with her fingers. Henry stared at her deep in thought. "What could that be?" he asked himself. "Although I don't know what it is, Henry, but I don't think we should have watched that movie, brother," Bumi said, her voice hesitant, but Henry had already made up his mind. "Let's try it," he said with a playful smile, unaware of the weight of his words. To him, it seemed like just another harmless adventure. "Let's just try it and see how it feels." Bumi frowned, immediately feeling uneasy. "No, brother Henry," Mom said, "we shouldn't copy things, especially things we see on movies. I don't want to try it," she said softly, but Henry's curiosity will not let him leave the topic. He still insisted. "Come on, Bumi, it's just both of us will do it and no one will know about it. Besides, I don't think it's a bad thing," Henry said. Bumi hesitated, unsure of what to do. Henry added, "Remember when you went outside that day? Even though Mom and Dad told us not to go outside, no one found out. But if you don't do this with me, I'll tell Daddy when they come back." Bumi panicked, not knowing what to do. Neither of them fully understood what they were about to do. But Henry's words made her feel trapped. Finally, she agreed. She took a deep breath and said, "Okay, Brother Henry, let's do it." In that moment, the curiosity that has always driven Henry and Bumi to explore it together seems accord. Unlike the other kind of games they play together, this one was different. At this point, they felt they needed privacy to explore this game. They entered the room and lay on the bed looking at each other, not knowing the next move to make or who will be the first person to make the move. Henry summoned courage and took off Bumi's clothes as he did to himself. What next again? They stared at each other, not knowing what next. Henry tried to kiss Bumi. She was startled. Why? Bumi asked. That's what those big people did in that movie. Henry replied calmly. Okay, continue, Bumi said. And in no distance time, they began kissing and Henry decided to go to the next stage. He tried slide his thing into Bumi's own. Bumi felt a sharp pain immediately and pushed Henry down. She screamed, running into the living room. Ah, this is so painful and bad. I never want to do this again in my life. She cried, clutching her chest as tears rolled down her face. The pain was unbearable, far worse than she had imagined. Henry, on the other hand, didn't understand why Bumi was so upset and still wanted to continue, unaware of how terribly what they are doing is wrong. He never knew that they were not supposed to this. But something in him tells him that what he's doing is bad, but who is there to correct him? Bumi's heart raced with fear, and she deeply knew that they did wasn't right. This is not like the harmless play and games they do. After playing, they used to share joy and how good they feel. But this time, there was no laughter, no joy, only pain and deep regret. Bumi regretted this day, and discomfort grew with each passing day. She could see the changes in Henry's behavior, and it scared her. He had become more stubborn, more insistent, and Bumi could feel that he was no longer the playful brother she used to know. He now wants something new, something big people used to do. The innocence that once was in him has disappeared, their bond seemed to have slipped away. One day, afternoon, when their mother came home briefly to pick up some documents, Bumi felt an overwhelming need to speak up. She couldn't bear the silence any longer. "Mom, can I talk to you?" she asked with her voice trembling as she approached her mother. Mrs. Ezekiel, who was distracted by phone calls and her growing to-do list, barely looked up. "Not now, Bumi, I'm in a hurry," she replied, trying to place calls and glancing at her watch. Bumi stood there, for a moment. Her heart was beating faster. Even if her mother gives her a listening ear, how will she say it? How will she tell her mother that this is what she did with her brother? What will be her mother's reaction? She thought while standing and staring at her mother. Mrs. Ezekiel noticed her daughter's mood and said, "Be a good girl, darling. When I come back, you can tell me whatever it is you have to say, okay?" "All right, Mommy," Bumi replied as she accepted her mother's decision. Immediately, Mrs. Ezekiel left the house. Bumi retreated to her room with tears flowing down her cheeks. Her heart ached, but she felt invisible in a house that was supposed to be a safe place. All she wanted was for her mother to hear her and understand the weight of her pain, if what they did was wrong or not. One afternoon, after the parents have left for work, Henry tried to make another attempt of the bad thing they did. Henry asked Bumi if they can imitate the inappropriate scene from the movie one last time. Bumi was shocked and scared at this point. She couldn't take it anymore. Then she ran out of the house, her small body shaking with fear and confusion. She didn't know where to go. She found herself standing at the door of their kind neighbor house, Mrs. Grace. "Bumi, what happened?" Miss Grace asked, kneeling down to meet her at eye level. Bumi couldn't hold it in any longer. She burst into uncontrollable tears, sobbing, "She's filled with tears. Everything is wrong," starting from Henry's request, the growing fear inside her, and the discomfort she now have at home. Miss Grace, who already felt pity for Bumi, wrapped her in a comforting hug. "Talk to me, what is the matter?" Miss Grace asked. Bumi, who is now bold, told her everything that happened and burst into cry again. Miss Grace was shocked, but she consoled Bumi. "You did the right thing by telling me," Miss Grace said softly, her voice warm. You don't have to carry this alone. You are still a child. If your parents aren't there for you, I'm here for you and we'll figure this out. Bumi held on to Miss Grace, finally feeling a sense of relief. The weight of what had been pressing on her chest seemed to have lifted up slightly. I'm scared. Bumi whispered, What should I do? She asked. Miss Grace smiled gently and wiped her tears. Don't worry, my dear. I'll help you. You are safe now. When Mr. and Mrs. Ezekiel returned from work, Miss Grace called both of them for a brief meeting. At first they were reluctant to go, but then again, Miss Grace is a very humble and happy woman who always minds her business. She won't have called them if the issue was indispensable. They reluctantly honored the invitation. After all said and done, Miss Grace told them everything that Bumi said. The parents were shocked, and at first they were in defense mode. Henry wouldn't do something like that. Mr. Ezekiel said, his voice firm with disbelief. Maybe they misunderstood what they saw, but I'm sure they didn't do anything. I trust my kids, Mr. Ezekiel said, trying to downplay the seriousness of the situation, but Miss Grace was so serious. Listen, Mr. Ezekiel, children know what they see and they're given enough material to make sense out of it. She said. You've been so focused on work that you've forgotten to see what your children are watching and care about what they are doing behind your back. This is a warning. Miss Grace added, her voice steady and filled with concern. Mr. and Mrs. Ezekiel were silent, realizing that their actions, although unintentional, had made their children vulnerable to dangers and doing things they are not supposed to do. They hadn't even considered this was not easy for them, but they knew they had to change. Mr. Ezekiel took immediate action to correct the wrong. He decided to monitor the children's screen time, ensuring that they only watched age-appropriate shows and engaged in suitable activities. They were also encouraged to talk about anything they had seen on TV because it will help them understand it better. In addition to these changes, Mr. Ezekiel arranged for both Henry and Bumi to speak with a counselor. They knew their children needed guidance to understand their emotions as they recovered from their experiences. The family made a conscious effort to spend more quality time together in the evenings. This is Mr. Ezekiel new timetable. Every day he would read stories to Henry and Bumi before they all go to bed, while Mrs. Ezekiel kept them engaged in fun games gradually. The children started laughing again, rediscovering their bond through positive, healthy activities. It was a journey, but the Ezekiels were committed to ensuring their children grew up in a safe and nurturing environment free from the dangers of inappropriate content. Months passed and the Ezekiels became a more attentive and present family. Mrs. Ezekiel made a conscious decision to reduce her workload and make more time for her family because Mr. Ezekiel, who is the provider for the home, also needs to give time to his work. But he did good by dedicating his weekends to spending time with Henry and Bumi. Under this new attention and love, the children blossomed and grew in good health. Henry and Bumi felt more confident, knowing they could approach their parents about anything on their minds. The painful silence that has once filled their home was replaced by laughter, love, and the warmth of a family that was learning how to truly be there for one. Another one evening, as they were all sitting together playing a board game, Bumi turned to her parents with a thoughtful expression. "Thank you for listening to me," she said, softly. This simple appreciation were filled with meaning. They brought tears to Mrs. Ezekiel's eyes. And in that moment, the family understood the true importance of their relationship. The greatest gift they could give each other was their attention, love, and presence in each one's life. This is the end of our story. This story teaches us that the greatest gift we can give our children is our attention and love. Children should feel that the need to always tell us something if they want to.